The hill overlooked the city, but it was not a place people went to admire the view. It was uneven, scrub-covered, exposed to the wind. From the top, you could see parts of Niterói, Brazil, rooftops, roads, the distant shimmer of water. But the hill itself felt isolated, forgotten, the kind of place you didn't visit unless you had a reason. On August 20th, 1966, a young boy flew a kite there. That's how it began. The kite dipped suddenly, tugged downward by a gust of wind, and the boy followed it up the slope, eyes fixed on the sky. When he looked back down, something on the ground caught his attention. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was wrong. Two men were lying there, side by side, still. At first, he thought they were sleeping. They were dressed neatly, formally, as if attending a meeting rather than hiking a hill. Dark suits, buttoned shirts, polished shoes. Their bodies were aligned, not tangled. Their arms rested naturally at their sides. Nothing suggested panic, nothing suggested violence, but their faces were covered. Each man wore a crude mask made of lead, molded into the shape of large oval eye coverings. No straps, no holes for breathing, just heavy metal shielding their eyes completely. The boy ran. When police arrived, the scene did not clarify. It deepened. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no injuries, no weapons. The men had not been buried. They had not been hidden. They had been placed. Near them were a few personal items: a plastic bottle of water, 2 wet towels, a notebook containing a short, handwritten message. The note was brief, functional, almost instructional. It read, 1630 be at agreed place, 1830 ingest capsules, after effect protect metals wait for signal mask. That was it. No goodbye, no names, no explanation, just steps. The men were later identified as Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, electronics technicians from the nearby town of Campos dos Goitacazes. They were not criminals, not drifters, not known cult members. They had jobs, families, routines. And yet, here they were, dead on a hill, following written instructions that seemed to anticipate their own end. The autopsy offered nothing. No cause of death could be determined. There was no poison detected, though decomposition had already begun. No blunt force trauma. No internal injuries sufficient to explain death. Their organs showed no obvious failure. The doctors could only conclude one thing with certainty. The men had not died violently. Whatever happened, it was quiet. As investigators retraced their steps, the timeline became stranger. The men had left Campos together days earlier, telling relatives they were traveling to buy materials. Nothing about their departure suggested finality. They packed light, no urgency, no emotional goodbyes. Witnesses later recalled seeing them in Niterói, purchasing raincoats, despite clear weather. Another recalled them buying water, calm, focused, purposeful, no fear, no hesitation. The lead masks became the center of attention. They were crudely made but intentional, heavy enough to block light, possibly radiation. They covered only the eyes, not the face, not the mouth. Why protect vision but not breathing? Why metal? Why lead? No one could answer. Some speculated they were meant to block a bright flash. Others believed they were symbolic, part of a ritual, not a function. The masks did not look like safety equipment. They looked like blindfolds for something unseen. Then came the notebooks. Investigators discovered that both men were involved in spiritualist groups, common in Brazil at the time. Groups that mixed Christianity, mysticism, pseudoscience, and belief in communication beyond the physical world. Some groups experimented with Some believed in ascension through controlled exposure to unknown forces. Most were harmless, but not all beliefs are meant to be tested. The note's language was chilling in its neutrality. Ingest capsules, not medicine, not poison, not experiment. Capsules. What capsules? None were found. If they had been ingested, they were gone, metabolized, dissolved, or undetectable, or never existed at all. The phrase, protect metals, drew intense scrutiny. Was that a reference to the lead masks, to shielding, to something expected to occur after ingestion? And then the final instruction, wait for signal mask. Wait, not flee, not hide, not escape. Wait. As investigators stood on the hill, one detail became impossible to ignore. There was no shelter, no cover from weather, no reason to remain exposed for hours. And yet, the men had waited there, together, until whatever they expected happened. Speculation exploded. Some suggested a failed scientific experiment. Amateur technicians experimenting with electromagnetic forces, radiation, or homemade devices beyond their understanding. Others believed in cult involvement, a ritual designed to facilitate contact or transformation that went catastrophically wrong. And then there were theories investigators refused to officially acknowledge. Theories that spread anyway. Extraterrestrial contact, dimensional transition, signals not meant for human bodies. The note did not read like fantasy, it read like procedure. One of the most disturbing aspects was what wasn't present. There was no struggle between the two men, no sign that one tried to help the other, no indication of regret. They stayed. Whatever happened, it happened to both of them, together, without resistance. Investigators asked a question that no report could answer. What kind of belief convinces two rational adults to lie down on a hill, cover their eyes with metal, and wait for something they cannot see? As the sun moved across the sky that day, shadows shifted over the bodies. They had not been rushed. They had not been interrupted. The instructions had been followed to the end. This was not a crime scene that felt chaotic. It felt concluded, as if the important part had already happened somewhere else, or in a way no one could observe. All that remained was the aftermath. In the weeks that followed, every attempt to impose logic only made the case feel more unstable, because logic depends on shared assumptions, and whatever assumptions guided these men were not shared by the world they left behind. The hill returned to silence. The city continued below, and the lead mask's case entered history not as a mystery of violence, but as something far more disturbing, a mystery of belief, obedience, and an ending that arrived exactly when expected. The moment investigators began looking into who Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana were, the case stopped behaving like a conventional mystery. On paper, they were ordinary. Both men were skilled electronics technicians. They repaired radios, worked with transmitters, understood circuitry and signal theory. They were not illiterate mystics or fringe drifters. They were methodical, technical, practical men. And yet, beneath that surface existed something else, a parallel world of belief. In 1960s, Brazil spiritualism was everywhere. Not the dramatic cult imagery popularized later, but quieter systems of belief, seances held in living rooms, study groups discussing energies, vibrations, and communication with realms beyond the physical. For many, it was philosophical. For some, therapeutic. For a few, operational. Manuel and Miguel belonged to that last category. They did not simply believe, they tested. Friends and acquaintances described them as men who talked obsessively about signals. Not metaphorical signals, literal ones. Frequencies, waves, emissions, forces that pass through space unseen but measurable. They believed the human body could be affected by these forces, that consciousness could be altered, that exposure, controlled exposure, could lead to transformation. This wasn't madness, it was conviction. Their notebooks, recovered later, contained sketches and calculations that blurred the line between science and mysticism, diagrams of devices that didn't exist, notes about energy fields and thresholds, repeated references to protection, shielding, metals, barriers. Lead appeared again and again. Lead blocks radiation, lead absorbs, lead shields. Why protect the eyes? Because vision is the gateway. Investigators learned that the men believed direct exposure to certain forces could be fatal unless properly shielded. The eyes, they believed, were especially vulnerable. Too much light, too much energy, too much truth. Hence the masks, crude, heavy, specific. They were not decorative, they were tools. The instructions in the notebook now read differently. Be at agreed place. Protect metals. Wait for signal. This wasn't a suicide note. It was a checklist. One former associate described conversations where Manuel spoke about leaving the body. Not dying, leaving, crossing, transitioning. He believed the physical form was a temporary vessel, and that under the right conditions, consciousness could survive separation. Miguel reportedly agreed, not blindly, but analytically. He asked questions. He refined ideas. He wasn't being led. They were partners. The capsules became the most frightening unknown. No one ever found them. No residue was conclusively identified. But associates believed the men experimented with substances meant to alter perception. Stimulants, sedatives, compounds that could induce dissociation, not to escape reality, but to prepare for something else. The capsules were not the point. They were preparation. The phrase after effect appeared in the note. After effect of what? Ingestion? Signal? Exposure? The note assumed knowledge that investigators did not have, and never would. One theory began to circulate quietly among those closest to the case, that the men were attempting a controlled encounter. Not with death, but with something they believed existed beyond ordinary perception. A signal. In radio theory, a signal must be received under specific conditions. Timing matters, position matters, shielding matters. The men had chosen a high place, an exposed place, a place free of interference. The hill was not random. It was optimal. The wet towels found near the bodies added another layer of unease. Why wet towels? Some believed they were meant to cool the body. Others believed they were ritualistic. Others thought they were part of shielding, grounding the body electrically. No explanation satisfied all the facts, but all explanations assumed preparation, not desperation. Investigators noticed something else. The men did not bring food. They did not bring shelter. They did not plan to leave. Everything they carried was designed for a single outcome. They were not returning. Psychologists later examined the case and noted something deeply disturbing. This was not coercion. This was not manipulation. This was shared belief reinforced through repetition. Two men validating each other's certainty. Two minds closing around the same conclusion. Two people willing to trust the system they built more than their own survival instincts. That is not insanity. That is conviction. As days passed without answers, police struggled to frame the case legally. There was no crime scene, no suspect, no violence. Just two men who followed instructions until their bodies stopped functioning. What do you call that? An accident, an experiment, a ritual, or something else entirely? The most unsettling possibility emerged slowly. that whatever the men expected did happen, just not in a way anyone else could observe. If their goal was not survival, but transition, then death was not failure. It was completion. The lead masks, the note, the preparation, none of it suggested panic. It suggested trust. Trust in a system no one else could see. Investigators eventually reached an impasse. They could catalogue evidence, they could propose theories, they could speculate endlessly, but they could not answer the central question. Why would two rational men willingly walk into an ending they fully anticipated? The lead mask's case was no longer frightening because of what happened on the hill. It was frightening because of what might have happened before. In conversations, notebooks, shared beliefs, quiet agreements that solidified into certainty. Certainty strong enough to override fear. And that certainty remained intact, even in death. By the time authorities tried to reconstruct the final days of Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, one thing became disturbingly clear. There was no single moment where this went wrong. There was no sudden break from reality, no visible collapse, no outside manipulator pulling strings. What happened on that hill was the final step of a process that had been building quietly for months, possibly years. A system of belief doesn't need a leader. It doesn't need a cult. It only needs reinforcement. Manuel and Miguel spent long hours together. They worked together. They discussed ideas together. They tested theories together. Their conversations looped. The same concepts revisited again and again, refined, strengthened, made more precise. This is how belief hardens. Not through spectacle, through repetition. Each time an idea is spoken aloud and not challenged, it gains weight. Each time it is confirmed by someone you trust, it gains authority. Over time, doubt doesn't disappear. It becomes unnecessary. And eventually, dangerous ideas stop feeling dangerous. They feel inevitable. Psychologists refer to this as mutual cognitive reinforcement. Two people sharing an unusual belief can stabilize each other, not toward reality, but away from it. Where one hesitates, the other confirms. Where one questions, the other reassures. It's not madness, it's alignment, and alignment is powerful. There was no evidence that Manuel or Miguel were isolated from society. They had families, jobs, social interactions. They functioned normally in every observable way, which is precisely why the case is so unsettling. They weren't detached from reality. They had constructed an additional layer on top of it. Investigators later learned that both men attended informal spiritualist gatherings, not cults, but discussion circles. Places where ideas about consciousness, energy, and higher dimensions were debated seriously. No one told them what to believe. They chose what to believe. And then they optimized it. Their technical background mattered more than investigators initially realized. They didn't talk about spirits the way mystics did. They talked about them like engineers, signals, thresholds, receivers, protection. To them, consciousness wasn't magic. It was a process. And processes can be engineered. This mindset is critical to understanding why they followed instructions that appear nonsensical to outsiders. From their perspective, the instructions were logical. Protect the eyes. Wait for the signal. Endure the after effect. This was not poetic language. It was procedural. One chilling realization emerged from the investigation. There was no evidence the men feared death, not because they were suicidal, but because death was not the objective. To them, death was a side effect. In engineering, systems are judged by outcomes, not losses. If the outcome is achieved, losses are acceptable, and in their framework, physical survival may have been optional. The masks become even more disturbing in this light. They weren't worn to hide identity. They weren't symbolic. They were functional. Heavy lead plates carefully shaped to cover the eyes, the most vulnerable sensory organ. Why only the eyes? Because you don't shield what you don't believe is at risk. Some theorists suggested the men believed in harmful visual exposure, light, energy, or information that could damage the brain if perceived directly. Others believed they thought the signal itself was lethal unless filtered. Either way, the implication is the same. They expected to encounter something powerful enough to kill them, and they prepared anyway. The fact that they brought no contingency supplies supports this. No food, no water, no escape plan. This wasn't negligence, it was commitment. The wet towels found near the bodies raised further questions. Why wet? Water conducts, water cools, water grounds. In electrical systems, moisture can serve specific functions. If they believed they were dealing with energy, the towels were not out of place. They were part of the system. What terrifies psychologists most about this case is not the content of the belief, but the structure. There was no charismatic leader, no hierarchy, no coercion, just two equals reinforcing certainty. That makes it resilient. That makes it invisible. By the time they climbed the hill, the decision was already made. The hill was merely the execution environment. Investigators later attempted to categorize the deaths: accidental, experimental, religious. None fit cleanly, because this wasn't faith in the traditional sense. Faith usually promises salvation. This belief promised transformation. Transformation is more dangerous than salvation. Salvation implies rescue. Transformation implies replacement, and replacement does not require the original to survive. The phrase after effect haunted the investigation. It implied they expected something after exposure, but not necessarily life, just consequence. What if the men believed the signal would permanently alter consciousness, even if the body failed? What if physical death was not considered failure, but confirmation? At that point, investigators were no longer asking how the men died. They were asking whether death had even mattered to them. The lead mask's case forces an uncomfortable realization. Human beings do not need coercion to do the unthinkable. They only need certainty, and certainty, once fully formed, does not argue with instinct. It overrides it. By the time night fell on the hill, the system was complete. Instructions followed, protections in place, expectations aligned. There was nothing left to decide. Whatever they believed would happen next, they believed it enough to trust it with everything. And that belief remains intact to this day, because no one ever proved them wrong. When police officially closed the scene on Morro do Vintém, they were left with something far more disturbing than two unexplained deaths. They were left with no crime, no sign of violence, no struggle, no poison, no weapon, no note of farewell. And yet, nothing about the scene suggested accident. This placed authorities in an impossible position, because without a crime, there could be no suspect, and without a suspect, there could be no motive, and without a motive, there could be no explanation the public would accept. The autopsy reports were the first major failure point. Brazil's forensic capabilities in the 1960s were limited, especially in rural regions. Toxicology tests were inconclusive. Advanced chemical screening was unavailable. What little tissue remained after decomposition yielded nothing definitive. No poison was identified, but that did not mean no poison was present. It only meant nothing recognizable was found. This uncertainty became the case's defining weakness. Investigators could neither confirm nor deny poisoning, radiation exposure, or experimental substances. every theory remained technically possible, which meant none could be proven. In official language, this is fatal to an investigation. Early police reports described the deaths as possibly accidental. Later ones quietly shifted to undetermined causes. But internally, officers knew neither description was accurate. Accidents do not involve written instructions. Undetermined causes do not include preparation. Then there was the note. 1630, be at the agreed place. 1830, ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals, wait for signal mask. Police attempted to trace the handwriting. No match. They searched notebooks, workspaces, family homes. Nothing. The note was not part of a larger journal. It was not a draft. It was a final document, which meant its purpose had already been fulfilled. Authorities briefly explored the possibility of a third party. Someone who instructed the men. Someone who organized the event. Someone who disappeared afterward. But there was no evidence of meetings, payments, or coercion. No phone calls, no witnesses, no travel records, and no signs the men were afraid. That last detail ended the theory. Fear leaves residue. It alters behavior. It creates hesitation. It fractures preparation. Nothing about the scene suggested hesitation. Everything was orderly, deliberate, complete. Police also examined the possibility of a hoax gone wrong, a staged ritual, a test of belief that accidentally resulted in death. But hoaxes require an audience. There was none. No cameras, no observers, no message meant to be discovered. The note was practical, not performative. As the investigation stalled, attention turned uncomfortably toward institutions. The men lived less than 20 miles from Brazil's military research installations. During the Cold War, Brazil quietly cooperated with foreign intelligence agencies. Experimental research, especially involving perception, consciousness, and human endurance, was not unheard of. But no files existed, or rather, none were accessible. Requests for military collaboration were denied. Not rejected, denied. No explanations, no comments, no clarifications. Just silence. This silence was louder than any answer. Because if the case were merely strange, it would be harmless. If it were merely tragic, it would be closed. But it was neither. Several detectives later admitted, off record, that they were advised to let the case rest, not because it was solved, but because pursuing it further would lead nowhere useful. That phrase appears repeatedly in internal correspondence. Nowhere useful. Not untrue, not false, just inconvenient. By the late 1960s, the case was officially archived. No suspects, no charges, no conclusions. The men were buried. The hill returned to silence. The masks were placed in storage, and the public slowly forgot. But forgetting is not resolution. It is avoidance. What disturbed later researchers was not what authorities failed to find, but what they stopped looking for. No serious effort was made to reconstruct the belief system. No psychological analysis of the men was conducted. No attempt to identify similar cases. It was as if understanding the why was considered more dangerous than not knowing. That decision may have been deliberate, because once you accept that two ordinary men willingly walked into death without coercion, the implications become unsettling. It means belief alone can kill. It means preparation can replace instinct. It means rational minds can design their own disappearance. The lead mask case doesn't suggest a hidden killer. It suggests something worse, that no killer was required. Over time, unofficial theories flourished. UFO contact, espionage, secret experiments, spiritual ascension, failed transcendence, but these theories all share one flaw. They assume something external acted upon the men. What if nothing did? What if the most dangerous force involved was internal? A closed system of certainty, a feedback loop of conviction, a plan followed perfectly to a catastrophic conclusion. Authorities may have realized this, and realized there was nothing to prosecute. No crime, no villain, no warning that could be issued. Because how do you warn people against believing too strongly? By shelving the case, the system protected itself, not from truth, but from responsibility. Today, the files remain incomplete. Some evidence is missing. Some reports contradict each other. Some testimonies were never recorded, not because of malice, but because no one knew what to do with what they were seeing. The lead mask case was not ignored because it lacked answers. It was ignored because it offered answers no one was prepared to face. And so the hill stayed quiet, the masks stayed cold, and the question remained unanswered. If belief can guide someone calmly to death, what does that say about the rest of us? Decades passed. The hilltop, where Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana lay, had grown over with grass and scrub. Children played near its edges. Tourists passed by unaware. For the world, it became nothing more than a small incline in Niterói, Brazil. Yet for those who studied the case, the hill retained its gravity, a magnetic weight pulling thought inward, compelling attention. Every detail refused to be forgotten. The lead masks, the notebook, the towels, the absence of struggle, the calm composure of the men, the silence that enveloped the scene. It became impossible to separate what was known from what was feared. Modern researchers revisited the case in the 1980s and again in the early 2000s, applying techniques that had long been unavailable to the initial investigators. Forensic advances promised clarity. Chemical residue analysis, trace detection, radiological scans, even digital reconstruction of handwriting. And yet, nothing changed. No toxins were detected. No unexplained radiation. No chemical residue that explained death. The lead masks themselves were examined and re-examined. They bore no trace of use beyond their original manufacture. They were functional, yes, but nothing more. Digital analysts attempted to decode the notebook instructions in a way never imagined in 1966. Every word, every symbol was fed into algorithms for pattern recognition, probability modeling, and linguistic correlation. Yet the message remained unbroken, cryptic. 1630, Beatagreed Place 1830 ingest capsules after effect, protect metals, wait for signal mask. Even with modern tools, the instructions resisted comprehension. It was as if they existed on a plane beyond ordinary human understanding, procedural, precise, and yet entirely alien. Psychologists studying the case theorized that the men were operating under mutual reinforcement loops that modern behavioral science could barely explain. They had reinforced each other's belief until doubt was unnecessary. Every step, every preparation, every measure taken on the hill made perfect sense within their internal logic. This was a rare form of human behavior, a lethal system built entirely from agreement and certainty, not coercion or manipulation. The capsules, long presumed central to the deaths, remain missing. Some theorists suggest they were never taken or never existed at all. The ingestion might have been symbolic, part of a psychological ritual designed to prepare the mind for the ultimate event. Without the capsules, one possibility becomes terrifyingly plausible. The deaths were the direct result of belief itself. The lead masks, meant to protect, became iconic symbols. But protection from what? From light? from radiation, from vision itself. Some investigators privately suggested the men believed they were receiving a signal, something incomprehensible yet powerful. The masks shielded their eyes from this signal, while the rest of the body endured it. What that signal was remains unknown. A flash of energy, a spiritual message, a scientific experiment beyond comprehension. Researchers in later decades attempted to correlate the men's technical expertise with experimental technologies of the era. Did their knowledge of electronics, circuits, and energy systems intersect with secret Cold War experiments? Brazil had active military installations, some under joint international collaboration. Some theorists speculated the men attempted a field experiment, a personal test of thresholds, consciousness, or perception. Yet there was no evidence of external oversight, no record of recruitment, no witness. The men acted entirely on their own initiative. Even the hilltop itself became a subject of scrutiny. Was it chosen for its elevation, for proximity to a line of sight, for spiritual resonance? No answer satisfied the investigators. It was merely high, exposed, isolated, perfect for observation, perfect for waiting, perfect for the signal. The psychological dimension deepened. Mutual reinforcement loops combined with ritualized preparation made each step inevitable. By the time the men reached the top, every action, towel placement, mask positioning, capsule ingestion, was the natural conclusion of months, possibly years, of mental conditioning. No external force was required, no outside manipulator. The system was self-contained. This became the most unsettling conclusion for experts decades later. The dead men were not passive. They were active participants in their own end, not coerced, not tricked, not panicked. Voluntary, methodical, precise, and in a sense, rational. The notebook's final line, "Wait for signal mask," hints at expectation. They expected something. Something would come. Whether it did or not is unknowable. Perhaps they expected an event beyond physical reality. Perhaps the signal was a metaphor for transformation, not annihilation. Perhaps the universe responded in ways modern humans cannot measure. No evidence survives to answer that. Even later archival work yielded contradictions. Files were incomplete. Evidence was misplaced or destroyed. Investigators died without leaving testimony. Families recalled only fragments of conversations. And the hill remained silent. Some theories ventured into extremes: UFO contact, dimensional entry, esoteric spiritual transcendence, secret military experiments, psychological warfare trials. All are technically possible. All remain unproven. All converge on one fact: no external confirmation exists. Researchers who attempted to explain the case scientifically found themselves confronting an uncomfortable truth. This case is not resolvable by conventional logic or forensic methods, because this case was not a crime, not a conventional death, not even necessarily a failure. It was an event carried out according to rules that outsiders cannot access, and it succeeded in its own terms. In the absence of clarity, the lead mask's case leaves a deeper question. If two ordinary men can follow a set of instructions, remain calm, protect themselves, and voluntarily meet an unknown fate, how fragile is the assumption of human survival instinct? If belief can override fear, preparation can replace instinct, and certainty can replace self-preservation. What does that imply for anyone else? The bodies of Manuel and Miguel were finally buried. The lead masks were preserved as evidence, stored in archives. The notebooks remained in police custody, largely unread, and the hill returned to its natural state, unremarkable to casual observers. Yet the case remains a ghost. It haunts studies of human psychology, belief, ritual, and decision-making. It challenges investigators, historians, and scientists alike to consider that some phenomena cannot be explained, only acknowledged. Decades later, the lead mask's case continues to spark fascination, fear, and debate. Documentaries, articles, and books explore the who and why, but the how remains a void. The void is terrifying because it suggests that human agency alone, unassisted, can produce outcomes beyond rational expectation. That certainty, shared and reinforced, can become lethal technology. That instruction, belief, and preparation can end lives without a single act of violence. For investigators, psychologists, and historians, the lead mask's case offers no comfort, no resolution, no culprit, no accident. Only the quiet truth that sometimes human conviction itself is enough to orchestrate a final, irreversible event, leaving behind nothing but questions. And in the end, that may be the most unsettling aspect of all. The case does not need explanation. It does not need a perpetrator. It does not need closure, because the event completed itself perfectly, invisibly, and utterly,